Night falls over a frozen forest, where a Navy SEAL and his dog rest inside a quiet wooden cabin. Suddenly, the German shepherd rises, ears sharp, drawn to the door by something only instinct can hear. The Navy SEAL cracks the door open, guarded and alert, expecting danger in the storm. Instead, he finds a teenage girl trembling in the snow, holding her injured dog and begging for help. He hesitates, weighing risk against instinct, then steps aside and lets them in. By the firelight, he treats the wounded dog, unaware this moment will change everything. Where are you watching from today? Like the video and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Legends. The blizzard didn't fall so much as pressed down. A heavy, relentless weight of snow and wind that erased the edges of the world. North of town, past the last plowed road and the final flicker of streetlight, a single cabin held its ground among black pines. Its roof was steep and white, its windows dim, its porch half buried beneath drifts that reshaped themselves every time the wind changed its mind. The forest around it moved like a living thing, branches bowing and snapping back, the air filled with the soft roar of snow sweeping sideways. Inside, warmth fought for territory. A fire licked at split logs in a cast-iron stove, the heat radiating in a slow circle that never quite reached the cabin's corners. The air smelled of pine resin, coffee that had gone lukewarm, and the faint metallic bite of tools kept clean and ready. Everything in the room had a place. Everything that didn't belong had been removed long ago. Hayes Maddox sat at a rough wooden table with his shoulders squared, not stiff, just set, as if his posture had been welded into him over years he couldn't outgrow. He was 28, built like someone who trained consistently, but never for show. Broad shoulders under a fitted long-sleeve digital camouflage top. A lean strength that looked practical rather than theatrical. His face was the kind of American handsomeness that didn't invite compliments so much as silence. Angular cheekbones, a strong jaw, a clean shave that made him look even more controlled. His dark brown hair was cut in a neat undercut, sides tight, the top trimmed and disciplined. Even in a cabin buried by snow, he looked like a man who still woke up on time without needing an alarm. On his left wrist, a high-end steel watch with a black face caught firelight when he moved his hand. On his waist, a dark tactical belt held a pouch and a holster-like carrier that looked more like a home for equipment than anything dramatic. His pants matched the digital camo, narrow enough not to snag, durable enough to outlast the weather. Tan combat boots sat planted on the floorboards, ready for ice, stone, or whatever lay outside. He was quiet by default, not in a performative way, more like he'd learned that words were not always the safest thing to release into a room. There was a small scar on his upper arm near the shoulder line, pale and old, the kind of mark you stop noticing until the cold made it ache in a dull, private way. Tonight, with the storm chewing through the walls, Hayes flexed that shoulder once and pretended the ache wasn't there. Across the room, his dog watched him. Onyx was a German Shepherd K9, black and tan with a short, dense coat built for work in winter. His body was balanced and athletic, muscle-tight and functional, every angle designed for speed and sudden stillness. His eyes were the kind that made people lower their voices without understanding why. Deep, intelligent, always measuring. He didn't wear armor. He didn't wear anything flashy. If there was a mark of an old collar on his neck, it was faint. Only noticeable if you knew to look. Onyx did not sprawl like a pet. He positioned himself like a guardian. Not aggressive, just intentional. Hayes lifted his mug, took a sip, and stared into the fire as if he could read a message there. The cabin creaked softly. Snow tapped at the window like fingernails. A battery radio on the shelf hissed with static, catching fragments of weather warnings and losing them again. It would have been an ordinary night for a man who'd chosen the quiet on purpose. Then Onyx stood. No bark, no growl, no dramatic warning. He simply rose with the smooth, controlled motion of a switch being flipped and stepped toward the front door. His ears angled forward, his head lowered slightly. His body settled into a stillness that felt heavier than sound. Hayes didn't move at first. He watched the dog the way someone watches a compass needle when the sky is gone. "What is it?" he asked, voice low, calm. He wasn't asking for words. He was confirming reality. Onyx froze at the door, his paws planted, his gaze fixed on the thin seam of wood where cold air always tried to enter. The dog's tail stayed neutral, neither tucked nor raised. That meant uncertainty. That meant the world had changed, but it hadn't decided into what yet. Hayes set the mug down. The faint clink sounded too loud. He stood, and the cabin seemed to reorient around him. His hand didn't go for anything theatrical. It simply hovered near his belt, close to the pouch and the carrier, close to the muscle memory of readiness. He listened. At first there was only the wind. Then, barely, as if the storm itself was hesitant, came a knock, soft, uneven, not a pounding, not a demand, a plea. Onyx didn't move. He didn't step back. He didn't step forward. He was a statue carved from purpose. Hayes approached the door, careful with his weight on the creaking boards. He killed the lantern near the entry with one practiced motion, leaving only the fire's glow behind him. Darkness became an ally, or at least a veil. He unlatched the door and opened it just enough to see outside. The storm shoved snow into the gap. Cold lunged in like an animal, snapping at his skin. Beyond the porch, the world was white and shifting. And there, framed by the blown snow, stood a girl. She looked about 15, too young to be out here, too old to be mistaken for a child. Her shoulders were narrow, her body slim beneath a wet winter jacket that hung heavy with snow. A knit beanie clung to her head, but strands of dark hair, brown, nearly black, escaped and stuck to her cheeks. Her skin was pale, not from makeup or light, but from cold and fear, her lips tinged with a faint bluish hint from exposure. Her eyes were what stopped Hayes. They were wide, yes, but not panicked in the way of someone who'd never been afraid before. They were focused, desperate, and strangely controlled, like she'd already used up the part of her that screamed. There was grit in her expression, the kind that forms when a kid learns too early that no one is coming unless they make it happen. In her arms, she carried a small dog. The dog, Milo, was a mixed breed, small to medium in size, with light fur darkened by wet snow. He trembled violently, not only from cold but from pain he was trying to hide. His eyes were half-lidded, glassy with exhaustion, but they flicked toward the girl's face as if checking whether she was still there. His breathing was tight, shallow. Every so often, his paws twitched as if he wanted to stand and couldn't. The girl's grip on him wasn't clumsy, it was protective. Her fingers were red and raw from cold, but she held him like something priceless. "Please," she said, and her voice cracked. Not because she was weak, but because her throat had been fighting wind for too long. I need help." Hayes didn't step back. He didn't step forward either. His eyes moved over her in quick, efficient passes. The way her boots were packed with snow, the way her jacket was zipped wrong, like she'd put it on in a rush. The thin scratch along the back of her hand. The faint tremor in her forearms from holding Milo for too long. He looked past her into the storm. The porch was empty. The yard was an ocean of white. Then he looked at Onyx. The shepherd stood just behind Hayes, head slightly lowered, eyes fixed on the girl and the dog. No aggression, no warning, just attention, a kind of measured recognition. Onyx's stillness held weight. It said, not a threat. But it also said something else Hayes had learned to respect. Not safe. Hayes shifted his stance, keeping his body between the girl and the interior of the cabin. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl swallowed. "June," she said. A pause. "Juniper. People call me June." "You're alone?" June's eyes flickered. A microsecond of hesitation that told Hayes the truth was complicated. "Yes," she said anyway, which sounded like a decision rather than an answer. "I didn't know where else to go." Hayes's gaze dropped to Milo. "What happened to him?" "I heard something outside," June said, words quickening now that she'd started. "A vehicle, in the storm. Milo ran. He always runs when he thinks something's wrong. And then he came back like this." Her jaw tightened. He couldn't make it back inside. I carried him." Hayes didn't ask why she didn't call someone. In weather like this, the question answered itself. He didn't ask why she knew where his cabin was, not yet. Some questions could wait. Some couldn't. Onyx took one slow step forward and stopped. June's eyes dropped to the shepherd. She didn't recoil. She didn't reach out either. She just stared, as if she understood that this dog wasn't simply an animal. Onyx's ears twitched. His nose lifted, sampling the air around June like he was reading a story written in scent. His gaze shifted briefly past her shoulder into the blizzard. And then he froze harder, so subtly a civilian might not notice. But Hayes did. A warning without sound. June's grip on Milo tightened as if she felt something change. Milo, weak as he was, suddenly lifted his head. For one startling second, the little dog's eyes sharpened and fixed on the darkness beyond the porch, past Hayes, past the warm light spilling from the cabin. Milo gave a faint, strained whine, not toward Hayes, not toward June, but outward, like he was reacting to something unseen. Onyx's body locked, not braced for attack, braced to block. Hayes felt it then. Not a sound, not a figure, just a shift in the air. The sensation that the storm had swallowed more than snow. June whispered, barely audible, "It followed us." Hayes didn't ask what it was, not because he believed in ghosts, because in his experience, people said it when they couldn't afford to say the truth out loud. He opened the door wider, just enough to let June pass without him stepping aside completely. "Inside," he said. June stumbled forward, and the heat hit her so fast she swayed. Hayes caught her elbow, not gently, not roughly, but with the controlled grip of someone who prevented falls for a living. Her sleeve was soaked. Her skin under the fabric was ice cold. Onyx moved with them, positioning himself between June and the open doorway, as if he could hold the threshold itself. Hayes pulled the door shut. The latch clicked. For a breath, the cabin felt like a sealed world. Firelight, wood, warmth, June's ragged breathing, Milo's faint trembling. Then Onyx turned his head toward the window. His eyes were fixed on the swirling white outside, searching not for shapes, but for patterns, an instinct tuned to what didn't belong. He stood motionless, ears forward, listening to a world that humans rarely heard clearly. Hayes watched him, a quiet tension settling in his chest. Somewhere beyond the glass, the storm kept screaming. But Onyx was listening for something else. Something that might have been left behind out there. Or something that hadn't. The door had barely settled back into its frame when the cabin reclaimed its silence. Not the easy kind. No, this was a tight, listening silence, stretched thin by the storm pressing in from all sides. The fire cracked once in the stove, sharp and brief, like a reminder that heat still existed in this pocket of the world. Hayes moved without hesitation. He guided June toward the table with one steady hand at her elbow, careful not to startle her. She was lighter than she looked, all bones and tension under layers of soaked winter clothes. Up close, he could see the way her lips trembled. Not from fear now, but from the delayed shock of warmth after cold. Her jacket was cheap, the seams fraying at the cuffs, clearly handed down more than once. Snow melted off her shoulders and pooled on the floor. "Sit," he said quietly, not as an order, but a grounding point. June obeyed, lowering herself onto the bench while keeping Milo cradled against her chest. She didn't loosen her grip, even when Hayes reached for the dog. Her arms tightened instinctively, eyes flicking up to his face, sharp, protective. Hayes met her gaze. "I need to see him," he said. "I won't hurt him." There was a pause. Then June nodded, jaw clenched, and eased Milo into his hands. Up close, Milo was smaller than Hayes had first thought. A mixed breed, maybe 2 or 3 years old at most, with light-colored fur matted dark where snow and blood had mixed. His body shook in shallow waves, every tremor a sign of exhaustion rather than panic. One ear lay flat, the other twitched weakly at sound. His eyes, though dulled by pain, tracked movement with stubborn awareness. Hayes laid him gently on the table, spreading a clean cloth beneath him. Onyx repositioned immediately, placing himself just behind June, angled so his body shielded her back while his eyes followed Hayes's hands. He didn't interfere. He monitored. Hayes rolled up his sleeves with practiced economy and opened a metal kit from the shelf, its hinges oiled, its contents meticulously organized. Bandages, antiseptic wipes, a small flashlight, scissors dulled just enough not to cut skin if his hand slipped. "You did the right thing keeping him warm," Hayes said without looking up. June swallowed. He wouldn't stop shaking. "He's still fighting," Hayes replied. "That's good." He examined Milo carefully, fingers firm but controlled. A gash ran along the dog's flank, deep enough to bleed, shallow enough to avoid muscle. Not torn, not jagged. The edges were too clean. This wasn't a fall. Hayes cleaned the wound slowly. Milo flinched, but didn't cry out. Instead, his head turned, weakly, insistently, toward June, eyes searching for her face. "I'm here," June whispered, leaning forward. "I'm right here." Her voice steadied him more than the fire ever could. Hayes noticed the way Milo's breathing eased just a fraction when she spoke. Loyalty, untrained but absolute. As Hayes worked, his nose caught something off. It wasn't blood, not smoke, not the damp, earthy smell of a storm-soaked forest. It was sharper, industrial. He paused, hands still. Onyx shifted. The shepherd began a slow circuit of the room, nose low, tracking something invisible across the floorboards. He passed the door, the window, the bench where June sat. Then he stopped, right beside her. June stiffened. "Did I do something wrong?" Hayes glanced at her. "Stay still." Onyx leaned in, sniffing the hem of June's jacket, then the sleeve, then her gloves. His ears flicked once, his gaze sharpened. Not alarmed, but intensely focused. Hayes felt the tension settle deeper into his chest. Onyx moved away, then back again, repeating the pattern. He wasn't confused, He was confirming. Hayes finished bandaging Milo and wrapped him in a thick blanket, lifting him carefully into a crate near the fire where the heat would stay consistent. Milo protested weakly. Then, stilled, eyes heavy, but still open. Only then did Hayes straighten fully and turn to June. "Tell me exactly what you heard," he said. June drew her wet gloves off finger by finger. Her hands were raw, knuckles red and cracked, a thin line of dried blood on the back of her left hand, where skin had split from the cold. "It was an engine," she said. "Not loud. Like it was trying not to be loud." Hayes nodded once. "Our house is closer to the tree line," she continued. "We don't get many cars out there, especially not in storms." Milo heard it before I did. He ran straight to the door and started growling. Not barking. Just low. She hesitated, eyes drifting toward Milo's crate. "He never growls like that." "What did you do?" Hayes asked. "I grabbed my coat and followed him," June said. "I didn't go far, just enough to see the road. There were lights, but they were covered. Dim. Then Milo ran toward them." Her voice wavered. "I yelled for him. Then I heard him yelp." Onyx's tail stilled completely. Hayes leaned back against the counter, folding his arms. "He came back with something?" June nodded. She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket and hesitated, glancing at Onyx as if asking permission. The shepherd watched her hands closely but didn't move. She pulled out a small object. It was metal, cold, no bigger than 2 fingers pressed together. One side smooth, the other etched with a faint symbol, half-worn, industrial, meaningless on its own. Hayes took it. The instant it changed hands, Onyx stepped closer. Not aggressively, intentionally. Hayes turned the object under the light. It wasn't sharp, it wasn't heavy, it wasn't dangerous by itself. But it did not belong. "This was on him?" Hayes asked. June nodded. "He wouldn't let go of it, even when I tried to pull him back." Hayes set the object on the table. Onyx stared at it, unmoving. The fire popped. For a moment, no one spoke. Without warning, Onyx lowered his head and sat. Not near June, not near the door, directly between Hayes and the table. It was an odd choice. Deliberate, blocking. Hayes felt a familiar, unwelcome chill crawl up his spine. The memory of another time, another place, when a K-9 had done something similar and he'd chosen to override it. He didn't move now. Onyx's eyes never left the metal object. June whispered, "What does that mean?" Hayes exhaled slowly. "It means this thing doesn't just belong to the storm." Hayes slid the object into a cloth pouch and sealed it. He didn't put it away. He kept it where he could see it. "June," he said, softer now, "why did Milo know where to run after he got hurt?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "You didn't lead him here," Hayes said. "He led you." June nodded slowly. "My dad used to take him out sometimes," she said. Before he stopped coming back on time." Hayes watched her carefully. "What did your dad do?" "Whatever paid," she said with a shrug that was too casual to be honest. "Deliveries, seasonal work. Sometimes he came home smelling like oil and metal instead of trees." Onyx's ears twitched. June hugged herself. "Milo went with him once. Dad said he liked having the dog around. Said Milo noticed things people missed." Hayes felt the shape of a pattern forming. He glanced at the window. Snow continued to blur the world beyond the glass. But something about it felt thinner now, less random. Hayes turned back to June. "You did the right thing coming here." She looked up, eyes shining but steady. "I didn't know if you'd open the door." Hayes nodded. "I didn't either." Onyx finally relaxed enough to lie down, but he placed himself facing the door, not the fire. The storm howled on. Inside the cabin, a new tension settled. Quiet, heavy, and waiting. Whatever Milo had found out there, it hadn't finished leaving its mark. And Hayes knew one thing for certain. This night was no longer just about shelter. The cabin had settled into a fragile equilibrium. The fire burned lower now, its heat steady but restrained, as if it understood the need for quiet. Milo slept in short, uneven breaths inside the crate near the stove, his body wrapped tight, chest rising and falling with the stubborn rhythm of survival. June sat on the bench with her hands folded in her lap, shoulders hunched forward, staring at the floor as if the wood grain might offer answers. Hayes worked at the table. He had brought out an old laptop, thick, scarred, the kind built for use rather than aesthetics. The casing bore faint scratches, the keyboard worn smooth in places where fingers had pressed too often under stress. He powered it on, the fan whining softly as it woke from long disuse. Onyx stood behind him, not close enough to touch, not far enough to disengage. The dog's presence was quiet pressure at Hayes's back, a reminder that time was no longer neutral. June watched Hayes's hands as he connected a small cable to the metal object Milo had carried back. She had never seen anything like the device up close before. Too simple to be valuable, too deliberate to be trash. "My dad used to say the forest keeps secrets," she said suddenly. Hayes didn't look up. "People put them there." June nodded, then hesitated. He never took Milo every time, just when he went farther. Hayes glanced at her then. "Farther how?" She shrugged, eyes distant. "Past the plowed roads, past where cell service dies. He said those jobs paid more because nobody wanted them in winter." Onyx's ears flicked at the word winter. Hayes focused on the screen as a series of raw files blinked into view, fragmented, incomplete. No names, no clear labels, just strings of numbers and a few partial icons. Enough to be intentional, not enough to explain themselves. He leaned back slightly, jaw tightening. No signal icon glowed in the corner. The storm had eaten whatever fragile connection might have existed. Out here, the world ended at the tree line. "This isn't random," Hayes said. "But it's not a full map, either." June swallowed. "So, what is it?" Hayes didn't answer immediately. He disconnected the cable and closed the laptop, fingers lingering on the lid as if weighing the consequences of knowing more. "It's a breadcrumb," he said finally. "Something meant to be recognized by the right person, or ignored by everyone else." June hugged herself. Milo didn't ignore it. Hayes looked toward the crate. Milo shifted in his sleep, letting out a soft sound that wasn't quite a whine. Even injured, even exhausted, the dog's instincts had been sharper than most people's awareness. Onyx stepped closer to the table, sniffed the air once, then turned his head toward the back of the cabin. The wind outside changed pitch. Hayes felt it before he heard it, the way pressure in the air shifted, the way silence rearranged itself. He turned slowly toward the rear window, eyes scanning the frosted glass. Nothing moved. Yet Onyx's body told a different story. The shepherd didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply angled himself toward the back door, muscles tight, head slightly lowered. Not fear. Recognition. June noticed it too. "He's doing it again," she whispered. "Yes," Hayes said. "And I don't like why." He walked to the back window and wiped a small circle clear with his sleeve. Outside, the snow blew sideways, thick and blinding. Pines swayed like dark silhouettes. There were no lights, no figures, no obvious signs of intrusion. But Hayes had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself clearly. He stepped back from the glass. "June, I need you to answer something honestly." She straightened. "Okay." "Did anyone see you leave your house?" Her mouth tightened. "I don't think so." "Did you pass any other buildings before you got here?" She shook her head. "Just trees." Milo ran ahead. I followed. Hayes nodded once. That matched what Onyx was telling him. The concern wasn't pursuit. Not yet. It was proximity. Hayes crossed the room and pulled a map from a drawer. Paper, creased, marked with pencil notes and faint coordinates. He spread it on the table, anchoring the corners with tools. "This area here," he said, tapping a point near a logging road, "lines up with what little this device shows." June leaned closer. "That's near the old service road. Dad used to say trucks took that route when the main roads were too risky." Hayes's eyes flicked to her. "Did he ever say what they carried?" June hesitated, then shook her head. "He stopped talking about work after last winter." The words sat heavy between them. Onyx circled the table once, then lay down near the back door, facing it squarely. He didn't relax. He posted. Milo stirred. It was subtle at first. A shift of weight, a low sound in his throat. Then, against all expectation, the injured dog pushed himself upright inside the crate, legs shaking but determined. His eyes fixed not on June, not on Hayes, but on the back wall of the cabin. He let out a single hoarse bark. It echoed sharply in the room, breaking the silence like glass. Onyx snapped to full alert, standing instantly, ears forward. His gaze followed Milo's line of sight, not to the door, but to a narrow section of wall where the logs met unevenly. Hayes's pulse quickened. Dogs didn't point like that without reason. Hayes moved carefully to the wall, running his hand along the wood. At first he felt nothing but rough grain and cold. Then, there, a draft. Barely perceptible, but wrong. He pressed harder. The section shifted slightly, revealing a shallow recess, a remnant of an old storage niche, poorly sealed, long forgotten. Inside lay nothing dramatic. No weapons, no supplies, just footprints in dust that shouldn't have been there. Fresh. Hayes straightened slowly. "Someone's been close," he said quietly. June's breath hitched. "Here?" "Not inside," Hayes replied, "but close enough to notice things most people wouldn't." Onyx remained at the back door, body rigid. He wasn't reacting to the wall anymore. He was tracking outward again, nose lifting, reading the wind. Hayes folded the map and slid it back into the drawer. He checked the latch on the door, then the window locks, his movements efficient and calm, despite the tightening knot in his chest. June watched him. "Are we in danger?" Hayes considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said at last. "But not immediately." She nodded, absorbing that with quiet resilience. "What do we do?" Hayes looked at Milo, then at Onyx. "We stay quiet," he said, "and we don't assume this place is invisible anymore." Onyx finally turned his head slightly, eyes meeting Hayes's for a brief second. There was no panic in them, only confirmation. Outside, the wind carried on, indifferent. Inside the cabin, the truth settled in. Milo hadn't just brought back a piece of metal. He had brought back attention, and whatever had noticed him hadn't finished deciding what to do next. The decision came quietly, not as a burst of urgency or fear, but as a tightening in Hayes's chest. The same internal click he'd learned to trust long before this cabin, long before the forest. Staying meant waiting. Waiting meant letting someone else choose the moment. Hayes didn't do that anymore. He packed fast, but not recklessly. A single rucksack, water, a thermal blanket, a compact med kit. The laptop went into a padded sleeve. The metal object wrapped again and tucked where it wouldn't clink or catch light. He extinguished the fire until only embers remained, reducing the cabin's warmth to a low, forgettable signature. June watched him with wide eyes, holding Milo close. The small dog slept fitfully. His body warm now, but fragile, his breathing uneven. June's jacket was zipped to her chin, her hands tucked under Milo's belly to share heat. "We're leaving?" she asked. "Yes," Hayes said, quietly. He opened the back door just enough to let the night in. The wind shoved against the gap, spraying snow across the floorboards. Onyx stepped through first, head low, tail steady, his black and tan body dissolving into the white. Hayes waited for the rhythm. Onyx paused, sniffed, took 3 steps, stopped again. A deliberate cadence. Not speed. Precision. "That's our pace," Hayes said softly. "Stay where he's been." June nodded. She didn't argue. She had learned, somewhere in the last hours, that questions could slow you down. They moved. The forest swallowed them almost immediately. Pines rose like pillars, their branches sagging under snow that fell in muffled sheets. The world reduced itself to a narrow tunnel of visibility, 10 feet, maybe less. Everything else erased by motion and wind. Hayes counted steps. He tracked direction by feel and by the subtle slope of the ground beneath his boots. Onyx didn't take the shortest route. He took the cleanest. He paused at low drifts, circled areas where the snow looked disturbed, and avoided open spaces where sound traveled. When the wind gusted harder, he angled their line so it masked their movement. Hayes followed without question, trusting the dog's map over any paper he could have drawn. June struggled to keep up, her breath rasping in short bursts. She was slight, tall for her age, but narrow, her weight more bone than muscle. Hayes slowed when her steps faltered, offering a gloved hand when the incline steepened. She accepted without embarrassment, eyes fixed on Onyx's silhouette ahead. Milo shifted in her arms, letting out a faint sound that was more breath than noise. June tightened her grip, whispering reassurances that steamed into the air and vanished. They moved like that for long minutes that felt like hours. Then June spoke. "My mom used to say winter shows you what matters," she said, her voice almost lost to the wind. "She said the cold strips away everything you don't really need." Hayes glanced back once. "What did she think mattered?" June smiled faintly. "The things that come back." Hayes felt the words land somewhere he hadn't planned to open. "My dad didn't come back much," June continued. "Not the way he used to. He'd leave before sunrise, come home after dark, smelling like oil and cold metal. He stopped talking about work, stopped bringing me souvenirs." She swallowed. "But Milo always came back, even when Dad didn't." Onyx slowed, nose low, tracing a line across the snow that Hayes couldn't see. Hayes remembered another winter, another landscape stripped bare by weather and choice. A K9 he'd worked with back then, different dog, same discipline, had stopped once, just like this, stiffened, refused to advance. Hayes had overridden the pause, trusting the mission clock over the animal's read of the ground. The mission went on. The consequences followed. He pushed the memory down as Onyx resumed movement. They crossed a shallow ravine where the snow hid, ice-slick rock. Hayes tested each step, anchoring June's descent with his weight, steady and silent. On the far side, the trees thinned. Onyx halted abruptly. Hayes froze. Ahead lay a stretch of open ground, wind-scoured and flat. At first glance, it looked untouched, a blank page. Hayes crouched, brushing snow aside with his glove. There it was, a tire track, fresh. The tread was sharp, edges crisp beneath a thin veil of powder. Too recent to belong to any vehicle that had passed before the storm. Too deliberate to be a snowmobile wandering off course. June sucked in a breath. That's new. Hayes nodded. Minutes, maybe less. Onyx stepped forward and sniffed the track, then lifted his head, reading the air, his body angled not toward the path, but away from it. Which way? June whispered. Hayes watched the dog. Not the road. They shifted course, skirting the open ground, letting the trees close around them again. Hayes marked the direction of tracks in his head, the distance, the angle. Whoever had driven through here knew this land, or had been shown how to use it. The storm deepened, as if to cover the mistake. They pressed on. Without warning, Onyx stopped and lowered himself into a crouch, not flat, not prone, but compact, and ready. His ears rotated, catching something beneath the wind's roar. Hayes felt it then, a vibration through the soles of his boots, faint, rhythmic, not footsteps. An engine, far off, idling low. June's eyes widened. That's... I know, Hayes said. Onyx turned his head slightly and looked back at Hayes, not asking permission, not warning, confirming. Hayes changed their route by a few degrees, cutting across a slope that forced them lower, closer to a cluster of dense spruce. He guided June behind him, using his body to block wind and sound. They moved without speaking, the engine's presence a ghost in the background, close enough to be real, far enough to be deniable. After several tense minutes, the vibration faded. Onyx rose and moved again, pace unchanged. June let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking, not from cold alone. That wasn't supposed to be there, she whispered. No, Hayes agreed. It wasn't. They reached a narrow trail barely wider than a person's shoulders, a cut through brush and stone that didn't appear on any map Hayes owned. He knew it because he'd made it years ago, clearing just enough to pass without leaving obvious signs. A habit from a life that valued exits. He ushered June through, helping her balance Milo as the path dipped and rose. The forest here was quieter, the wind blocked by terrain. Snow fell straight down, thick and muffling. June stumbled once, catching herself against a tree. Hayes steadied her. She looked up at him, eyes reflecting what little light there was. You didn't have to help us, she said. You could have sent us back. Hayes considered that. You didn't knock on the wrong door. They moved again. Onyx slowed near the end of the trail, sniffed the ground, then stopped. He stared ahead, ears forward, body locked. Hayes followed his line of sight. The trees opened onto a small clearing. Nothing dramatic. No buildings, no lights. Just snow, wind, and the faintest indentation where multiple tracks converged before disappearing under fresh powder. Hayes crouched and examined the marks. Footprints, different sizes, not hurried, organized. June's voice trembled. That's where Milo ran. Hayes stood slowly, and where he came back from. Onyx turned away from the clearing and faced the direction they'd come from, then back again, then settled into a stance that suggested one thing. Do not cross. Hayes made the call. We stop here, he said. Not for long, just enough to reset. June nodded, clutching Milo tighter. Milo stirred, lifting his head weakly, eyes scanning the trees as if he recognized the place. Hayes felt the weight of it then, not fear, not adrenaline, but responsibility. Milo hadn't just survived an encounter. He'd marked a boundary. He'd brought back proof, not by design, but by instinct. And now the forest itself seemed to be asking what Hayes would do with that information. The wind picked up again, erasing edges, hiding choices. Onyx held his ground. So did Hayes. They reached the town just before dawn. What passed for morning came without light. Only a thinning of the dark. A subtle shift from black to iron gray, as snow continued to fall in slow, indifferent sheets. The town lay in a shallow valley, a scatter of low buildings huddled together as if for warmth. Half the streetlights were dead. Windows glowed unevenly, some dark, some lit by generators that hummed with weary persistence. The sign at the edge of town was half buried in snow. The paint chipped and faded. Hayes didn't slow long enough to read it. He did not head for the sheriff's office. Instead, he turned down a narrow residential street where the houses leaned closer together, old porches sagging under decades of winters. He stopped in front of a modest, single-story home with white siding and a small ramp leading to the front door. Practical, not decorative. Onyx paused, sniffed the air, then relaxed just enough to signal known ground. Hayes knocked twice. The door opened. Almost immediately, Ruth Caldwell stood there in a thick wool cardigan over scrubs that had long since faded to a soft blue-gray. She was in her early 70s, tall and spare, with posture that suggested years of standing through long shifts. Her hair was steel white, pulled back into a low bun, a few wisps escaping around a face lined by both age and attention. Her eyes were sharp, not unkind, but assessing in the way of someone who had learned to read truth from breath and color rather than words. She took one look at Hayes, then at June, then at the bundle in June's arms. "Come in," she said, stepping aside without hesitation. Warmth enveloped them as the door closed. The house smelled faintly of antiseptic, soup, and old wood. A generator thrummed somewhere out back, steady and patient. Ruth guided them to the kitchen table, already clearing space. "Set him down," she said gently to June. Slowly. Milo stirred as they laid him on a folded blanket. His eyes opened, halfway, unfocused, but present. Ruth crouched immediately, her movements efficient, familiar. She ran practiced fingers along his ribs, checked the bandage Hayes had applied, nodded once. "You did well," she said to Hayes. "Clean work. No infection yet." June sagged with relief, gripping the back of a chair. "He's going to be okay?" Ruth met her eyes. "He's alive. That's the first victory." She fetched a heat pack and slid it under the blanket, adjusted Milo's position, then covered him again. Milo let out a long breath and settled, his body easing for the first time since the forest. Onyx lay down nearby, eyes on the door, ears tracking the subtle sounds of the house. He was calmer here, but not at ease. Ruth straightened and finally looked fully at Hayes. "You don't come through in weather like this unless it matters," she said. Hayes nodded. "It does?" Ruth noticed the rucksack at his feet, the way he stood angled, not fully relaxed, not fully defensive. She'd seen that stance before years ago, on men who came through her emergency room carrying more than injuries. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes," Hayes said. Black. June wrapped her hands around the mug Ruth gave her, the steam fogging her lashes. "Thank you," she murmured. Ruth waved it off, then noticed the cloth pouch Hayes had set on the counter. "What's that?" Hayes hesitated, then unwrapped it just enough to reveal the metal object. The change in Ruth was subtle, but immediate. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. Her eyes darkened, not with fear, but with recognition. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. "Milo brought it back," Hayes said. "From the forest." Ruth exhaled slowly. "I was hoping I'd never see one of those again." June stiffened. "You know what it is?" Ruth shook her head. "Not exactly, but I've seen things like it." She leaned against the counter, folding her arms. "Years ago, during storms like this, people went missing. Loggers, seasonal drivers, a hiker once, always written off as exposure or bad decisions." She looked at Hayes. "But some bodies showed marks that didn't match accidents. And there was a warehouse fire down by the service road. Burned hot, fast. Too fast for what they said was inside." Hayes's jaw tightened. "And it was rebuilt." "Within weeks," Ruth said. "New siding, new locks, no questions." Onyx lifted his head at the word warehouse. Ruth noticed. "That dog of yours listens better than most people," she said. "He has reasons," Hayes replied. The front door opened. Deputy Connor Voss stepped inside, brushing snow from his shoulders with deliberate care. He was in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that looked carved rather than grown. Sharp cheekbones, a straight nose, a trimmed beard that never quite softened his expression. His uniform was clean despite the weather, his badge polished, his eyes an unremarkable brown that missed very little. "Morning," Voss said easily. "Power's spotty. Doing a quick check on folks with generators." His gaze moved, not sweeping, but precise. It lingered on June a moment too long, then flicked to Hayes's rucksack. Onyx rose. Not fast, not threatening, but present. Voss noticed. He smiled faintly. "Easy, boy." Onyx didn't move. Hayes stepped subtly between Voss and June. "We're fine," he said. "Appreciate the concern." Voss nodded, eyes shifting to Ruth. "You doing okay here, Mrs. Caldwell?" Ruth met his look without flinching. "I've lived through worse winters than you've been alive, Connor." Voss chuckled. "Fair enough." He glanced once more at the counter, at the edge of the cloth pouch. "You folks traveling?" "Passing through," Hayes said. Voss held his gaze a second longer, then tipped his hat. "Stay warm." When the door closed behind him, the house felt colder. Ruth waited until Voss's footsteps faded before speaking again. "He's polite," she said. "That doesn't mean he's harmless." Hayes nodded. "He was looking for something." "Yes," Ruth agreed. "And I don't think it was the generator." June's voice was small. "Are we safe here?" Ruth placed a hand on her shoulder. "Safer than most places. But winter has a way of carrying secrets through walls." Hayes looked at Onyx. The shepherd had resumed his post by the door, muscles relaxed, but attention fixed outward. "We won't stay long," Hayes said. "Just long enough for Milo to stabilize." Ruth nodded. "I'll do what I can." Outside, the town remained quiet, wrapped in snow and half-darkness. But beneath it all, something was awake, and it was paying attention. The plan formed the way plans always did for Hayes, quietly, with edges sharpened by habit. He sat at Ruth Caldwell's small kitchen table long after June had fallen asleep on the couch, Milo tucked against her chest beneath layers of blankets. The generator hummed outside, steady and tired. Snow brushed softly against the windows, like a sound trying not to be heard. Hayes laid out his map again. The service road. The warehouse. The coordinates half buried in corrupted data. The pieces fit too cleanly to ignore. There was a way to do this without being seen. He could move before dawn, Circle wide. Use elevation and distance. Observe, not engage. Confirm patterns. Then pass the information to someone who still existed within the system. Someone whose name he hadn't spoken out loud in years, but whose number he still remembered. It was the disciplined choice, the kind that kept civilians alive. Hayes closed the map and looked toward the hallway. Onyx lay just outside the door, head resting on his paws, eyes open, always open. His breathing was slow, controlled. He hadn't slept deeply since they'd reached town. Hayes stood, pulled on his jacket, and slipped the rucksack over one shoulder. He moved quietly, mindful of the floorboards. Onyx rose immediately. "Easy," Hayes murmured. "Just a look." Onyx didn't respond the way he usually did. He stepped forward and stopped directly in Hayes's path. Hayes paused. The shepherd stood squarely, body aligned, straight ahead, neither tense nor relaxed. His ears were forward, eyes steady, not pleading, not anxious, just final. Hayes shifted left. Onyx mirrored him. Hayes frowned slightly. "Move." Onyx didn't. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't confusion. It was refusal. Hayes felt something old tighten in his chest. This wasn't how K-9s were trained. This wasn't a cue or a warning or a hesitation. This was a hard boundary drawn by instinct too deep for commands. "Onyx," Hayes said quietly, adding weight to the name. "Heel." The dog didn't break eye contact. He didn't growl, didn't bark, didn't lower his stance. He simply stood there, saying no in the only language he had. Hayes exhaled slowly and lowered the rucksack to the floor. He remembered another night, another mission years ago, when a different dog had done the same thing, stopped, blocked, refused. Hayes had overridden that pause with logic and urgency. The mission clock had demanded it. They'd walked into a space that looked empty. It hadn't been. The memory surfaced uninvited. Radio static, snow blowing sideways, a voice that never came back over the line. Not a teammate he'd known well, not a friend. Just a name that had vanished. Hayes rubbed a hand over his face. "All right," he said quietly. Onyx stepped aside. Not relieved, not pleased, resolved. Hayes straightened, heart beating slower now, steadier. He folded the map and put it away, the plan dissolving without argument. Sometimes survival wasn't about what you knew. It was about what you chose to trust. June woke later, just as the sky began to lighten into something resembling morning. She sat up slowly, disoriented for a moment, then remembered everything at once. Her hand instinctively checked Milo. He was warm, breathing steady, still fragile, but holding. She swung her legs off the couch and padded into the kitchen. Hayes stood at the counter, brewing coffee. Onyx sat near the door, posture relaxed, but watchful. "You're not leaving," June said. It wasn't a question. Hayes shook his head. "Not today." June nodded, relief and confusion mixing across her face. "I thought, after last night." "I thought so too," Hayes replied. June glanced at Onyx. "He stopped you?" "Yes." She studied the dog, brow furrowing. "Milo does that sometimes. When something feels wrong, he'll sit in front of the door and won't move no matter how much I yell." Hayes looked at her, then, "And do you listen?" June hesitated. "I didn't always." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of that shared understanding settling between them. June took a breath. "There's something I need to tell you." Hayes turned fully toward her. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the cloth-wrapped metal object. She held it carefully, as if it could burn her, or disappear if she let go. "I didn't tell you everything," she said. Hayes waited. When Milo came back with this, June continued, I thought about hiding it, burying it, throwing it in the river once he was safe. Her voice trembled slightly. I didn't want anyone to come looking for him, or for me. Hayes nodded. That fear made sense. But last night, June said, lifting her eyes, when I saw him stand up just to warn us, I realized something. She extended the object toward Hayes. He didn't bring it back to protect himself, she said. He brought it back because it didn't belong. And because someone had to notice. Hayes took the object slowly, feeling its cold weight settle into his palm. June exhaled shakily. I don't want to keep pretending nothing's happening just because it's easier. Hayes met her gaze. That's not an easy choice. No, June agreed. But it's the only one that stops it from happening again. Onyx watched the exchange, eyes moving between them, ears relaxed. The sound came faintly at first, barely more than a ripple in the air. Onyx's ears flicked. Hayes felt it a second later, the low thrum of a vehicle passing somewhere beyond town limits. Not close, not careless, purposeful. Onyx rose and moved to the window, peering out between the curtains. He didn't stiffen. He didn't retreat. He tracked. Hayes followed his line of sight, watching the road beyond Ruth's house as a pair of headlights glided past without slowing. Not searching, not stopping, just passing through. June whispered, Do you think they know? Hayes watched until the lights vanished into snowfall. I think they assume no one's paying attention. Onyx sat. The moment passed, but it left something behind. Hayes moved back to the table, packing the metal object and the laptop together now, sealing them with care. I'm going to send this out, he said. Not from here, but soon. June nodded. What happens then? Then other people decide what to do with it, Hayes replied. And we stay alive long enough to make sure it gets there. June glanced down at Milo, then back up. I used to think being quiet kept you safe. Hayes's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it just keeps the wrong people comfortable. Onyx returned to his place by the door, settling in, chin resting on his paws. Outside, the town stirred slowly, unaware of how close it had come to being part of something darker. Hayes felt the path narrowing, not closing, but clarifying. He hadn't chosen to get involved, but he had chosen not to walk away. And this time, he had listened when the dog said no. The storm didn't end with a roar. It thinned, slowly, like a hand loosening its grip. Snow still fell, but without urgency. The wind eased into long, tired breaths that moved through the trees instead of tearing at them. Morning arrived, not as light, but as clarity. Edges returning to the world, one line at a time. Hayes stood outside the cabin, breath fogging the cold air as he tested the repaired hinge on the front door. The wood bore fresh marks where the storm had slammed it again and again, forcing the frame just enough to complain. He had reinforced it with a strip of salvaged metal, measured, aligned, and secured with quiet precision. The door closed cleanly now. Inside, the cabin was calm, in a way it hadn't been since before the knock. Onyx lay just inside the threshold, his large frame stretched out across the floorboards, black and tan coat catching the pale morning light. His eyes were open, but soft. His ears rested naturally instead of forward and alert. The difference was subtle, but unmistakable. He was guarding, not bracing. June slept on the couch beneath a thick quilt Ruth had insisted she take. Her dark hair spilled across the pillow, cheeks flushed with warmth instead of cold. For the first time since Hayes had met her, Her face was unguarded. No clenched jaw, no vigilance held behind her eyes. Just the deep, uneven breathing of someone who hadn't slept properly in days and was finally letting go. Milo lay curled beside her, bandaged flank rising and falling steadily. He stirred as Hayes stepped inside, lifting his head with effort. His legs trembled as he pushed himself upright, managed 2 slow, deliberate steps, then stopped. Hayes crouched instinctively, hand hovering, not touching unless needed. Milo stood there, swaying slightly, then sat with a soft huff of effort. His eyes were clearer now, still tired, still sore, but present. June didn't wake. Milo glanced at her, then back at Hayes, tail giving a faint, tentative thump against the blanket. "That's enough for now," Hayes murmured. Milo accepted that, lowering himself carefully. Ruth's voice drifted from the kitchen. "He's healing faster than I expected." She stood at the counter, wrapped in her cardigan, hands around a mug. In daylight, she looked smaller than she had the night before, but no less solid. Her movements were slower now, more deliberate, the way people moved when they'd already given their urgency to other lives. "The wound will scar," she continued, "but it won't take him." Hayes nodded. "Thank you." Ruth studied him over the rim of her cup. "You sent the information." "Yes. Through channels that still work? Through people who know when to keep their names off paper?" She accepted that answer. "Things have been quieter already," she said. "Phones ringing where they shouldn't. Paperwork moving when it usually doesn't." Hayes didn't smile. He'd learned long ago that real consequences never announce themselves loudly. "They'll peel back layers," he said. "Slowly. It won't look like justice. It'll look like audits, transfers, doors closing." Ruth nodded. "That's how the worst things end." She glanced toward the window, where sunlight finally touched the snowbanks. "And the people who vanished?" Hayes exhaled. "Some answers will come too late." Ruth didn't argue. She had lived long enough to know the shape of truth when it arrived incomplete. Onyx shifted slightly, resettling his weight but keeping his position at the door. His gaze followed nothing now. No sound, no movement. Just awareness, held lightly. They returned to the cabin that afternoon. The road back through the forest was quiet, stripped clean by wind and time. No new tracks, no engines, just the low creak of trees adjusting to their own weight. Hayes walked ahead, Onyx pacing beside him, June following carefully with Milo wrapped inside her jacket. The forest no longer felt like it was holding its breath. When the cabin came into view, unchanged but no longer isolated in the same way, Hayes felt something loosen inside his chest. He didn't unpack immediately. Instead, he checked the perimeter. Not because he expected trouble, but because habits earned through survival didn't vanish just because the danger receded. Satisfied, he stepped inside and set about rebuilding what the storm had tested. He reset the stove, restacked the wood, tightened the latch on the back window. Ordinary actions, necessary ones. June watched from the table, Milo asleep at her feet now, instead of in her arms. "You're not going back," she said. Hayes paused. "To what?" She searched for words. "To hiding." He considered that. Outside, the forest stood quiet, stripped of drama. Inside, the fire crackled softly. "No," he said, "but I'm not going back to who I was either." June nodded slowly. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do next." Hayes looked at her, really looked. She was still young, still carrying too much for her age. But there was something steadier in her now, a resolve shaped by choice instead of fear. "You don't have to decide today," he said. "Winter doesn't rush answers." She managed a small smile. Onyx rose and crossed the room, stopping in front of Hayes. He looked up at him, not with urgency, not with warning, just connection. Hayes rested a hand briefly on the dog's head, feeling the warmth beneath his glove. As dusk approached, a sound broke the stillness, not from the forest, but from within the cabin. The radio. It crackled to life on its own, static clearing just enough for a voice to come through. Not urgent, not dramatic, measured. Hayes turned it up slowly. "Investigation ongoing," the voice said. "Several logistical contractors placed on administrative hold pending review. Additional inquiries expected." Hayes met Onyx's eyes. No tension, no alert, just confirmation. The world had noticed. Night fell gently this time. June slept again, deeper now. Milo curled against her legs. Onyx returned to his place by the door, not as a barrier, but as a constant. Hayes sat alone for a while, listening to the quiet. Real quiet, not the kind filled with waiting. He thought of the choice he'd made in the town, the path he hadn't taken, the dog that had stood in his way without explanation. Years ago, he had believed destiny arrived with force, with orders, with violence, with irreversible moments. Now he understood something different. Destiny came softly. It arrived when someone stopped moving forward long enough to listen. Hayes looked at the repaired door, the sleeping girl, the dog who had never needed words. The storm had passed, not because someone had defeated it, but because it had done what it came to do. Strip away everything unnecessary and leave behind what mattered. And this time, Hayes stayed. Sometimes, God's miracles don't arrive as thunder or fire from the sky. They come quietly, through instinct, through restraint, through a moment when someone chooses to stop and listen instead of pushing forward. In a world that rewards speed, noise, and certainty, faith often asks for the opposite: patience, humility, and the courage to trust what cannot speak in words. Sometimes God's warning comes through a dog who refuses to move. Sometimes his guidance comes through a stranger knocking at the door. And sometimes his protection comes not by changing the storm, but by teaching us how to walk through it. As you return to your own life, remember this: pay attention to the quiet signals. Care for those placed in your path. And trust that no act of compassion is ever wasted, even when the outcome is unseen. If this story touched you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment with where you're watching from and what this story meant to you. And subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Legends to continue walking with us through stories of loyalty, faith, and unseen courage. May God watch over you and your loved ones. May He guide your steps, protect your homes, and grant peace to your hearts, especially in the storms you face. Amen.